What's going on, everyone? And welcome to another episode of Writing Friction. And as always, today's guest is pretty cool. Everyone, please say hello to Jon Raymond. How are you, Jon?
I'm well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, most definitely. I wanted to ask you actually before. I do like what's behind your right shoulder, framed on the wall. Who is the artist of that? Do you know?
This thing right there.
Yeah.
I don't know who the artist is. I found that at like a stoop sale in New York, and I totally
Okay.
dug it. Yeah. This, however, is Borges, and this was painted by a good friend of mine, Storm Tharp. So Borges likes to hang out on my wall here too.
Nice. Are you in your little writing area? Is this your writing nook we're looking at?
Yeah, I mean, we're in my basement in my office, but it's a pretty sporadically used office, I will say at this point. It's yeah, it's not a lot of light, and with my computer I can kind of wander around the house, so it's kind of sort of a bit of a junkyard right now. It's
Yeah.
not super well used.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
You're in Oregon?
I am in Portland, Oregon. Yeah.
Were you born and raised there, or are you from there originally?
I was born down near you in Palo Alto,
Oh, okay.
and lived in Menlo Park until I was 8 years old.
Yeah.
Um, and then we moved up here to Portland when I was 8, and then I've lived here on and off since then. Like I spent 5 years in New York. I went away for college, that kind of stuff. But yeah, no, I mean I've had yeah I'm pretty I'm closer to like I've been here a lot longer than most people I meet in Portland these days. I'll say that.
Yeah, I mean, it's people say that about San Francisco, but I feel like they were saying that 10 years ago.
It's
Uh,
always, yeah, these cities are that way.
every,
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, again, we were talking before the podcast. My family's from the Bronx, and if you take my mother through the South Bronx today, she'll be like, "Oh, no, 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 this is not the Bronx that I know." Yeah, that's cool. I've been to Portland a bunch. I've been touring in bands forever. And Portland's always one of those cities that if you're a musician, I mean, it's an absolute you have to.
Yeah.
Got to stop there. Also, every time I think of Portland authors, I always think, and I always forget it, screw up the last name, Chuck Palahniuk.
Chuck
He was
Palahniuk, yeah.
yeah, yeah, he was a Portland guy. What are some other Portland authors you kind of run in that scene? Is there a scene up there?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, growing up here, there were some writers. I mean, the big one, not Portland necessarily, but in Oregon, Ken Kesey was obviously like one of the big people. Then Ursula Le Guin is one of our huge, like, you know, gods.
Yeah,
She just passed a couple years ago. Those guys were sort of always around. Catherine Dunn, who wrote Geek Love, was also like active back in the day. Um, and but it's been interesting. Like in the preamble, you mentioned Tin House, but like in the years kind of since Tin House appeared on the scene here in Portland, like there are just a ton of writers now. I mean, it's like
yeah,
really thick with writers. I mean, like Karen Russell lives here, Patrick DeWitt, uh, uh, Cheryl Strayed, Lydia Yuknovich. I mean, just like a ton of people and a lot of like pretty heavy hitters. It's pretty cool.
yeah.
It wasn't like that when I was a kid.
Yeah, I mean, and correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, you do write about Oregon quite often, right? I mean, it's what you so
Yeah, yeah,
yeah. Well, it's interesting when I talk to different people, different authors, where they live. Yeah, it really. I mean, I've talked to Aowen Ivy. She lives in bumfuck Alaska, and how she writes is totally different than how you probably write in Portland or how I write in San Francisco. But if you could kind of take us back growing up there, did you always want to write about it? Was it something you were inspired by? How did you kind of decide to narrow it down to that? How did you start writing?
yeah. Well, I mean, I was a big reader as a kid. It's not like I had, I mean, the idea of, I mean, there was one writer that kind of lived in my town, which was kind of interesting. The poet William Stafford. His mom was actually, or his wife was my fourth grade teacher, which was kind of interesting. So it was just kind of this interesting idea that, oh, there is like someone sitting in a room writing somewhere in this town, which is kind of weird. But that was by far the closest to like a professional writer that I had any kind of awareness or contact with, you know. Um, but yeah, I was a very big reader, and I yeah, how God, I mean, how far back do you want to go with all this
I mean,
stuff? I mean,
let's take it back. I mean, again, everyone starts, I started writing a couple years ago because I've been reading my entire life. I'm
yeah,
33. I started writing when I was 30. But the idea of putting the paper to the pen, I had a distinct moment I could think back. Was there a
yeah,
time that you had like I'm just gonna write something shitty at least?
yeah. I mean, yes and no. I mean, I think there were some moments, I guess, in my like maybe early 20s or late teens, like it wasn't so much writing necessarily, but that I wanted to do something creative, you know, like I wanted to make art in some sort of
Were
way.
you doing anything artistic at the time?
Yeah, I mean, I dabbled in a lot of different things through my 20s. I mean, living in Portland in the 90s was a pretty fertile place, you know, and like there's a lot of just, you know, it was cheap and you had a lot of latitude to do shit. So, you know, you know, I made like a feature movie at the cable access station. Like I was painting murals that I would put up. I was writing like curating art shows and doing essays for those, and um, you know, like just a lot of different kinds of stuff, you know, and all of which was fun and interesting. But I'll say I did come to the end of my 20s, like late in the 20s, that kind of Saturn returns area, you know, when you kind of have to get real about some stuff. And I did realize, I think at that time for me, that a lot of the like visual art and things like that that I was doing, like were things that I liked, but that were not like giving me energy in the way, you know, like writing was the only thing that I actually would sit down and do. And like, it wasn't like I was just forcing myself to do it in some way, or like, it wasn't like an idea that then I just had to execute. It was like, no, something's happening while I'm doing this. Like, this is actually some sort of, you know, process that I can get into. And so there did come a point late in my 20s where I was like, I'm going to put the other stuff aside. I'm just going to like get back to fiction. This is like what I always kind of thought I was going to get back to, but it took a while.
Uh,
Um, and so at that point, then I moved to New York and did like an MFA program at the New School
Manhattan?
in Manhattan.
Mhm.
Yeah. Um, and while I was there, like wrote a novel and
Well, wait,
uh,
hold on, wait, hold
yeah, okay, all right.
on.
We can slow it down a little
Well,
bit.
no. A couple questions. One, was
Okay.
that your first time in New York City?
Well, I mean, I'd visited before, but
Okay, okay.
yeah, but yeah, I mean, that's kind of funny. I mean, it's like I mean, by the time I got there, I was like, I don't know, 29 or 30, you know,
Yeah.
and I hadn't put like I guess I had the idea that like to do writing. I mean, part of the problem of being in Portland and dabbling in a lot of different artwork is that there were just sort of no avenues to take it to like a next level and sort of, you know, do something that got out into the world, you know. So I think I got it in my mind that like, well, if you want to write something, you should go to New York and like, you know, make that scene, you know. So
And
I
when
went,
was this? What time? What era? Like where?
this is like, you know, around the turn of the millennium, I guess, you
All
know.
right.
I was
When the
like,
Strokes were playing the clubs.
yes, the Strokes were definitely part of the world at that.
Yeah.
They were emerging into the world at that
Uh,
time, exactly.
yeah.
Um, and so, but yeah, it was funny. Like I wasn't sure. Like I knew I wanted to go to New York. I had a friend, uh, an old friend who had decided to go to an MFA program. She applied to the New School, and I was like, Heather's the kind of person who would have done a lot of research and figured out like the best school to go to. I'll just go where she went. Like, why do I have to duplicate that? So that was kind of my whole rationale. Um, and then it was cool, you know. I mean, being, you know, Portland has a small town vibe, and it was you know, through those 90s, my 20s, like, you know, I was definitely out and about a lot, you know, and like there's a lot of just civic responsibility that I had to go to people's shows, to go to people's whatever. And it was nice to land in New York where there was like no obligation, like no one cared if I showed up to anything, and I could just sit in my room and like do my thing.
And
So,
you only knew that one person, you said?
well, I mean, I knew a friend. No, I knew her. Then I crashed with a friend who I knew some people there at that point. Like another thing I was doing in my 20s was editing a magazine. So
Oh,
like
okay.
through that, like I also had, I sort of knew a fair amount of people by the time I got to New York already.
What
And then
magazine?
it was called Plasm. It was,
You got a copy? Nice.
yeah.
Cool.
You know, it was like a kind of groovy art magazine kind of
Oh,
thing.
nice. Are they still in publication?
No, this
Okay.
was that went through, it sort of started in the early 90s, like part of that like Raygun early laptop publishing kind of movement. And I kind of hooked up with them more in the late 90s, late 90s, I guess. And then I guess the last issue probably came out a while ago. Yeah, but
And
yeah.
were you editing kind of before you were writing?
Well, before I was writing fiction, yeah. I mean, in that sort of 20s period that now I seem to keep talking about, like uh, I was writing for newspapers, you know, like I was writing art reviews for the like daily newspaper and writing stuff for the weekly, and um, writing just little essays here and there and doing this kind of editing. So it wasn't like fiction, but it was in some ways actually really helpful preparatory writing, mostly in that it was like unlearning a lot of like academic writing that I had internalized in college, you
Yeah.
know, and trying to write in a sort of professional way for actual editors for public consumption, you know,
Something that people actually want to read.
something that someone has to read, and like, yeah, and that like functions in the world, you know, like that is, yeah. And I found that actually really helpful to just, it just kind of drains a lot of the ego out of it, you know, where it's like, okay, I'm writing for like an actual purpose here, and it's not, doesn't all have to be about like every precious decision I want to make, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So you're kicking it in New York City. You go to this MFA program. You're hanging around. You got responsibilities. When did you start that first novel? Right. That was what you said before I cut you off.
Yeah, no, it was, I mean, I went there, you know, with a handful of stories that I had started,
Oh, okay.
thinking that that would be, you know, the thing I would spend my time polishing up and doing or whatever.
The stories.
Stories, yeah. But I got there, and as I recall, like workshopped, you know, like two of them or something. And it then occurred to me, I'm like, what am I doing? Like, I've already written these stories, basically. Like, I've bought myself 2 years right here where, you know, I'm paying for this, and like, I'm just gonna try something. So, and I was like, I should be using this to like figure out a novel. So
Yeah.
I had an idea for a novel that I thought I was going to be starting like once the stories were all polished, but instead I just like went for that and just did it.
And
Yeah.
what was that first novel?
That was called The Half-Life. And it's the one that just got made into the movie First Cow that is out this year. But
Is the movie already out? Did it just come out?
the movie is out, yeah. So we can get to that at some
Yeah, for
point.
sure.
But it's but yeah, and it was very much a regionalist sort of novel. Like it was very much about you know, part of it was about the fur trapping trade in the Northwest, and part of it was about hippie commune livers in the Northwest, and there were buried bones and you know, yeah, just kind of
Fur trapping.
fur trapping.
Is that a specific thing you had connection?
Well, yeah, I mean, oh no, not, I mean, only in as much as I grew up here and, you know, have an interest in the history of the place, you know. So I think, you know, in that way that some writers do, they just kind of dig into their home space, you know? And
Yeah,
so,
I mean, I'm doing the same thing right now. The thing is, we were talking before the podcast about The
yeah,
Sopranos, and I grew up in northern New Jersey, and I grew up around like a lot of the mafia was around.
yeah,
You experienced it. But one of the things I'm working on right now is I'm trying to do a mafia book, but in LA in a
yeah,
different time. But you're right. I'm going back to the
yeah.
experiences I had as a kid. I wasn't in the mafia. What the fuck do I know about the mafia? But what do you know about fur trapping? It's you go back to what you know. Yeah.
Totally. And I mean, you might not like exactly know what the mafia stuff is, but you know some of the people. You've probably like been in houses that are like their houses. You know, I mean, it's like you're bound like sort of just by neighborhood and culture and stuff to a lot of different things. I mean, that was what I found in New York, you know, like I had sort of assumed I wanted to kind of work in that more regionalist mode. That was just a decision that I made at a certain point. But it became clear in New York when I'd be walking around, I'd be like, I've never been in any of these people's apartments. Like, I don't know what their houses look like, you know? Whereas here, like, I can see people on the street and I'm like, yeah, I basically know what your house looks like, you know? Like, I just have more stuff, you know? So, um, it just, yeah, whatever. It's like, that's like this little extra rung that you have into that kind of material.
Yeah. And so what was the routine? Were you working on a routine for that first novel? Were you kind of doing things, it's your first time doing it. I mean, I'm sure you had to learn a lot of things along the way. Was it a difficult process? Did you find that first novel an easy process?
It seemed difficult at the time, but I did not realize how difficult it could actually be. Like in retrospect, it was maybe not as difficult as I thought. So, I mean, it went pretty fast. It was like a 2-year intensive writing process with maybe another year of like more sporadic edits coming in on it, which now seems like more or less as quick as a thing can go of that scope that it was. But it was full on. I mean, I had a job. I did get a job at that point, actually working for Tin House. Like that was
Oh, okay.
I was an editor at Tin House for a spell during that time. I mean, longer than that time, for like 10 years or something. But so I had this job at Plasm, which paid me a tiny bit of money, and I had a job at Tin House that paid me a tiny bit of money. Um, and I just basically lived in like abject poverty. I mean, it was just, I mean, I had for the last 10 years anyway. It was not like I had made any money doing anything, but I had really cheap rent, like really cheap rent.
I was gonna say you lived at a time right at the very end, I feel like, of cheap New York rent.
Yeah, I mean, and I moved in with a friend who'd been there for a while, so I
Yeah.
was able to kind of even get on his coattails. So, I mean, it was in like Windsor Terrace, Brooklyn, if you know that neighborhood, and like, um, but I just sat. I mean, I had no money, so I couldn't go do anything even if I wanted to, and I didn't really want to go do anything because I was there just to work, and so I just sat in that bedroom, like basically all day long for 2 years.
What I'm doing.
Grinding it out. Yeah, totally. And it's like, it's a weird way of living, but it was kind of just what had to happen. So, um, uh, I mean, I haven't, yeah, I mean, that was some long hours, putting in some really long hours. Yeah.
So you finished the book. Do you are you writing this book with the idea of trying to get it published? Was it did you just want to do it just to do it for yourself? I mean, I'm assuming, you said you're working at Tin House, you're around people who are into the business, I'm assuming. How do you go about getting that first book published?
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. So, I assumed, yeah, that like working at Tin House, I mean, yeah, I definitely wanted to publish the book. Like, I mean, I stupidly have not had any like I don't have any skills exactly. Like there's not really been like another, like I don't know what else I would do. Like I was kind of on the plan that I'm like, I hope something can kind of work out here and lead to something, because like I don't know what the fuck else I'm gonna do,
Yeah.
So that and I would have thought, yeah, and through Tin House, I was sort of starting to learn a little bit. Like I didn't really know much about the publishing industry at all. I mean, it was very mysterious to me, and
It's like the
I feel,
record industry. If you're not in it,
yeah,
it's this thing that you don't. Yeah, it's a.
it's really like no one has the, like even the people who are deep in it don't even necessarily have a big map of it, you know? And it's like, I mean, I still really barely comprehended like what contemporary fiction was supposed to be like, you know? I mean, it was not like I was even necessarily reading a lot of contemporary fiction. It was, you know, it was still like some kind of, I don't know what kind of fantasy I was bringing to it exactly. But anyway, I was starting to kind of feel it out. And the yeah, I would have thought that through Tin House, you know, because a lot of agents, you know, agents send stuff there. They had a lot of tentacles together. And my friend Rob Spillman, who was the editor, did kindly kind of hook me up with some agent connections to send the manuscript to.
Okay.
But none of those worked out. Like they all rejected it. So
it's a common theme on the podcast.
It's a, yeah, I mean, that's just part of the racket. That's the life we've chose. So at that point, like once that started happening, I was like, all right, this is like too many eggs in this basket. Like I can't, you know, keep asking Rob to just, you know, tell me another agent's digits, you know, it's not working. So I sort of tried to feel around for other possibilities. And I took a year off during the time I was in the MFA program to work for a film director friend of mine, Todd Haynes, doing his, I was like his assistant on a movie, Far From Heaven, which meant I just drove him to and from the set and like got his lunch and stuff.
Yeah.
But through Todd, I met a guy named Oren, who was a screenwriter and who I like befriended, just kind of hanging out on set. And Oren had a writing partner, sort of collaborator named Ira,
okay,
who had a boyfriend who was a literary agent. And so it was basically like a friend of a friend's boyfriend was an agent, you know? So I was like, all right, I'll go with that, you know, let's shoot it down that ladder and see what happens, you know, or shoot it down that chute. And that agent was the guy named Bill Clegg, who's like a really great agent.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. Oh yeah. Wow. Okay. Well, know someone, I guess that's
yeah, but it was like a weird, like jerry-rigged thing, you know, where it's just like, okay, if it can go here and here and here. And so Bill like read it and totally like was responsive and like got back immediately, and like suddenly like we were kind of in business, and he turned around and sold it to an editor at Bloomsbury named Colin Dickerman, who's a great guy. And that was an amazing like turn of events, you know. I mean, it was it's just, you know, it's like, I'm sure if you talk about the stuff with other writers, you know, it's like it's never the front door that you walk through, you know. I mean, it's like it's always shooting ladders and backwards and stuff. And so it's like, yeah, this was like, you know, how this ended up down that path was, there was no way to plan it, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up touring in bands, and you know, you try to get signed by a record label, things like that. The more and more, you know, I'm still new to this literary, you know, publishing world. My first book came out 3 weeks before the world ended, so it's all good. No worries. The second book will be fine. But having been in the music world for so long, the similarities between the major record labels and like the publishing, and how, you know, bands used to shop their demos around, it's so similar, even how they distribute things, all these things. So you get that first book, you sell it. Do you think like, now you know, I'm going to be the next big author, or was it, I need to start writing the second book? What do you do? What happens after that first book comes out?
Yeah, I mean, to me, I really did not comprehend like the market in any kind of way. Like the fact that someone wanted to like proofread it and print it and like bind it in a fucking, with a perfect binding, like that to me was like, this is beyond anything I could imagine. This is like, I have a fucking binding now, you know? So that was pretty much the extent of it. Like I didn't quite comprehend like how badly that book did, you know. Like, I mean, to me it was like, oh, this is a book in the world, that is a mark of success. You know, it doesn't
You.
to me, like it didn't occur to me that there were expectations beyond that
uh,
necessarily. I mean, like I didn't, read the New Yorker. I had barely even read the New York Review of Books, I think. I mean, it was like it just didn't occur to me. In retrospect, yeah, like that book did not do well, um but I don't know what would have happened if it had done well. I certainly would not have been prepared to like deal with whatever expectations were there. Um, it wouldn't have changed the fact that you then have to go and figure out another book to write. I mean, it's not like the wheels are greased and you just get to keep doing the same thing. So I think the problem of figuring out what to do, there's just no, like, that's the hard part. um so so for me, the next book was actually quite difficult. Like it was that second book problem where,
sophomore slump kind of thing.
yeah, or yeah, a sophomore, yeah, definitely. I mean, it just proved to be a lot harder than I thought it was gonna be, and it never, it was one of those books that just hemorrhaged out like many times. This one was like a 7-year process, and
Right.
it never, you'd think after that long you'd have some big, incredible like thing, and it just never happened that way. It just sort of remained anemic and barely alive. Like, I mean, I think I got it to the point where I was like not embarrassed, but it was like,
Uh-huh.
it just was not, it was a struggle.
Well, were you doing any? I mean, you say 7 years, right? So that's almost a decade. Were you doing anything else within that time? Or what
Yeah.
else were other projects?
Yeah. So the nice thing that happened in that period was, those stories that I had come to the program with, like that were germinating in my hard drive somewhere. Um, those kind of returned into my life too. And I um, started, putting together a collection of stories that made sense to me. Like I was understanding that like this novel is not like moving at the rate that I need it to, or whatever. It's hard. So I needed something else. The other thing that was quite amazing in that period is, so I did write a story that got like, let's see, I wrote a story that got published with like some photographs by a photographer friend of mine. But after the novel came out, um, this film director, Kelly Reichert, we'd become acquainted. Like she was a friend of Todd Haynes also. We had mutual friends with Todd. Kelly had a very small amount of money that she wanted to make a film with, and was sort of looking for material to adapt into a film. And um, she read The Half-Life and liked it, and asked me if I had anything like smaller to adapt, because The Half-Life is a fairly epic book. It's not like something that would have been easy to do. And so I did have a story and I shared it with her. And it was a really simple story about like two guys taking a walk in the woods and, reconnecting or something. Like totally not, I mean, for a short story, like fairly commonplace for like a realist fiction, sort of trip. Um, but not the kind of thing that like almost anyone would consider adapting into a feature film. Like, I mean, it really is like a small naturalist sort of story. But she responded to it and decided like, yeah, I'm going to turn this into a movie. And so I worked with
You're
her
like,
on that.
okay.
Yeah, I was like, fine, good, knock yourself out, like, I mean,
Yeah.
I didn't believe it was going to happen or anything.
Yeah.
Um, but Kelly is a very, very like driven, willful person, and a really sensitive and beautiful filmmaker. And so she pulled it together and made a feature out of this story. And like I helped adapt it to some degree, but more importantly, like we started a conversation that like was good. We were like, yeah, we seem to relate to each other and understand each other. And so that movie became a small film called Old Joy. and it like premiered at Sundance and did well critically. And it was and it was Kelly and I were both, I think, realized that like we would like to let's see what happens next, you know. So again, I still didn't fully believe that she was like able to like replicate that in any way. So, you know, she wanted another thing to adapt, and I had a collection that I was sort of working on. So, like rather than write her a script, I was like, I'll write you a story. So if and when it doesn't happen, at least I've got a story to like add to the collection,
yeah.
you know, like I wanted to write this on some level anyway. So yeah, let's just use that.
Yeah.
So I wrote a story, and it was like a kind of drifter story about a young woman whose car breaks down on her way up to the canneries in Alaska. Like it's another like very Northwesty kind of thing. And really even before the story was even fully done, like she began the adaptation and we kind of turned it into the script. And that then went on and became a film called Wendy and Lucy that starred Michelle Williams. And so it like sort of took it another bump up as far as like, you know, getting out into the world and stuff.
Had that, real quick, you mentioned, I mean, both these instances, you had to adapt these things into a screenplay, right? Had that been your first experience ever doing that? I mean, can you talk a little bit about adapting a short story into a screenplay?
I had done some like just script writing just with like friends a little bit, you know, like one friend in particular, this guy Steve Doughton, a great guy, really interesting artist and filmmaker. That's a whole story unto itself. But he and I had worked on a couple scripts actually while I was living in New York, and you know, through working with him a little bit, I started to understand a little bit more the mechanics of how a script works. But it's not like a big mystery. I mean, it's like if you write the stuff I write is like fairly conventional, you know. It's like it has scenes, it has like moves in a fairly linear way.
Yeah.
Like it's not like, you know, unrelated. It's a cousin. It's related. It's a film. You know, it's not.
Well, I have a story, and I've said it before, but
Yeah.
right after high school, instead of going immediately to college, I took some time. I did a couple of years. I went to school in New York City for audio engineering, and I got a job at a studio in, I guess, a little south of Chelsea, and the receptionist at the place was a screenwriter, and
Yeah.
I watched this woman for a year and a half.
Yeah.
Pitch her same screenplay, only one. She never had it, and it was only one. I mean, Ken Burns, Matthew McConaughey, anyone who walked in that door.
Oh no.
The receptionist. So it was just like, so that's always just been my little thing. So I've always had this idea of screenwriters just being anyone. Please read my screenplay. Please read.
Yeah. I mean, it's a humiliating job ultimately. Like even if
I didn't want to say it. You said it. I didn't want to say it.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I mean, even if you're like reasonably successful at it, it's humiliating. I mean, it's just, you know, there is like a kind of inherent like there are issues in there. But I mean, I've been like insanely lucky because it's like my path with it has been like very organic and like has been very much bonded with this one person who, you know, has now, I mean, we've now done 5 movies together, and it's like a 20-year relationship, you know. So it is like a kind of like a, I mean, whatever, it's really quite amazing. It's a blessing. But like yeah, I don't know, screenwriting is weird.
It's a weird one. Yeah. I mean, I'm not making fun of her. It's just, it was my one experience.
No. I mean, it's people are really desperate to get their stuff out there. You know, I mean, you gotta people gotta hustle. You know, it's like
I got rejected by 73 different literary agents, so I get it.
Yeah, no. Rejection is part of this gig. Yeah.
So are you? All right. So you got 2 novels out at this point. You're working some stories. You got movies. Are you, I mean, are you writing every day still? Or are you the kind of guy who's always kind of chewing things away at your head? Are you always thinking about the next project? Or are you kind of just living it day by day at that point?
Well, like at that point, like, yeah. So
do you have pressure from the publisher? Like, it's been 7 years, we need this fucking book?
No one's waiting for anything that I'm writing. It's not like there's no there's no one's no one's clamoring for this. So yeah, I mean so yeah, so the Half-Life, the first book came out in like 2004. Then like the short story collection ended up coming out before the novel was done. So that came out in like 2009, I guess. And that was called Livability, and at that point it had 2 stories that had been made into movies already. So it was like, you know, for a short story, I mean, it still got rejected by a bunch of places. It like didn't do much, you know. I mean, it was good, but that was a good experience, that story collection, because it did like, you know, it felt like people liked it, and it like you know, got like a regional award, which was a big deal for me, and like it was, you know, it just felt like a, you know, decent outing. And then, but then when the novel came out, the second novel, which was called Rain Dragon, you know, that was more of a disappointing experience. You know, not that I had big expectations, but it was just sort of a tough thing to be like, you know, this is as good as I could do, but it's like not, you know, gonna set the world on fire in any kind of way, you know. But it was, you know, you know, it was a lot of work. So not that it shows. Anyway, so that stuff had all sort of run its course. By that time, also, I had then moved back here to Oregon with my girlfriend Emily, who's also a writer, and we had bought a house here, and so we were kind of back.
Fed up with New York, or you just wanted to?
Well, no, I mean, we love New York, but Emily had gotten a book deal, and so she had to write it, and so she had to kind of quit her job in New York anyway to do that. And you know, she had some money from that, like I had some money from that first book and from some other movie stuff, and like we were able, and this was like that period of time when they would just let you buy a house with like almost no money. So it was like we were able to like actually like buy a house, which we would never be able to do in New York. So and you know, and there was the sense that like, okay, we're going to move there, get a house, and like there will be children and stuff. And so and that is what has happened. So like now I have kids, and like, you know, we have you know, a different house, but it's like still in Portland. And so, you know, just the life was happening, you know, which was great. But yeah, that boy, God, we're really moving through this in pretty like slow fashion here, but like
I mean, no, I mean, it's just, you know, people, this is what people want to hear, right? You know, again, a lot of the people who hear the podcast, listen to the podcast, you know, they're working on their first book, or they, you know, or like me, their first book got rejected, and I self-published my first, it's a boxing formula. And so people need to hear that it takes 7 years to write your second book.
Totally.
You know, I talked to Janet Fitch, and she was she wrote White Oleander. Went on, you know, became a massive success. And I asked her, I'm like, so what happens next? She was, you know, and I even posted a clip of what she says, but she was like, it totally fucked her up for 3 years. You know, she said she was writing a book, and at the end of 3 years, she had 900 pages, and she didn't even know what it was.
Wow.
And like her editor called, and they're like, can we just have a title of the book? And she said she started breaking down in tears. You know, so yeah, again, I think people need to hear these things, and everyone has a different path.
Totally.
You know, all right, so you moved back to Oregon. You're 3 novels deep now?
Well, 3 books, like 2 novels and a story.
In a short story.
I mean, at some point, like, not exactly. Actually, I moved back to Portland in 2005. So right after the first novel came out. So then the story collection and the novel came out, like, you know, in the next 5 years or so after being back in Portland. So but yeah, but none of these things were making money or doing anything like to like, there was no there was no pressure, you know, like in a bad way, like there's no interest, you know. And I mean, really, that's whatever. I mean, the books that I've written, they've not gotten big audiences or anything, you know. It's not like there's a, you know, people waiting. So anyway, then but I've been lucky in that the movie stuff has happened also, and so I've been able, like the day job, whereas some people would have to go teach or go work in advertising or do whatever.
I own a
Like,
dog walking business.
yeah, like that, whatever. Like, I mean, there's got to be something, like I've been lucky in that. So through the Kelly stuff happening, like we did those first couple movies, and like then it kind of looks like you know what you're doing, like you at least have a couple credits.
Mhm.
And then my friend Todd, who had introduced me and Kelly, Todd Haynes, like he brought me in to work on an HBO miniseries called Mildred Pierce, which is like that you do get paid for. It's not like retire money, but it is like that's middle class living.
Uh-huh.
Um, so that was like an amazing job and project to do. And again, kind of like kick the can down the road as far as like getting other like work.
Well, what
So
was that? I mean, what was that experience like? Sorry, everyone, Reba's barking. Don't worry. It's podcasting in 2020.
yeah,
What was that experience like working with HBO? I mean, we talked Sopranos before the podcast. I mean,
yeah,
HBO only puts out the best of the best of the best.
yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that experience?
Yeah, it was a great experience. It was awesome. Uh, it's a book that I really loved. Like I really loved James Cain, and that book in particular, Mildred Pierce, was one that I really dug. And like I had actually given it to Todd. Like there's a while when I was just giving out Mildred Pierce to people because I'm like, look at how great this book is. And so Todd was one of those people. And so I think that was partly why he felt obliged to, bring me in on the like adaptation of it. And Todd is a dear friend, and it was like a total blast to like figure it all out with him. Um, and then yeah, the HBO people were, I mean, in retrospect, it is one of those things where it's like that was much simpler than it will ever be again. Like we, basically did the adaptation on spec, and then got he and his producer Christine got Kate Winslet attached, and then it went to HBO, and they happened to sort of have some sort of like opportunity where we could kind of slip into their schedule, because often you end up in those things like with long development.
Well, you got to do a pilot first, though, right?
Well, in this case, it was a mini series,
Oh, so it was just the
so
one.
it was pretty much like, yeah, here's like 5 hours of stuff. Um, and so it just kind of went right through, and it happened really fast, and it was just really, I mean, amazing. I mean, really, like everyone involved was like insanely talented, and then even the people at HBO, it turns out, are like people who just want to do really good stuff. Like it's like oh, here come the suits with their like notes.
Well,
And
you
then
keep saying
like,
the people. I'm like, people imagine like the suits, right? That's literally what
yeah,
you
but in
imagine.
fact they're like, no, let's like make this more sophisticated and complex. I mean, it's
Yeah.
like it was not any, it was only trying to make things better, which is in some ways, yeah, it's almost frustrating. You're like, well, when do I get to like yell at the suits? It's
Right.
like
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
no but it's like there are no like good suits. They're just smart people.
Yeah.
um so that was like a really great thing, and like it was through that, I think, that, I mean, again, like, so through doing these films and doing the thing with HBO, like in a sense, then I became like a real screenwriter, because people would call me to do stuff and then it wouldn't get made. So I spent like a good long like spell, or I have a lot of things in my hard drive that I've written for people, and they've paid me to work on, and then they don't work out, and you know that's like no stupider than a lot of work that people do. I mean, friends who work in advertising, they do a lot of bullshit that they don't,
Yeah. You
whatever. I
approach
mean, everyone does bullshit that they have to deal with. So,
Yeah.
and these have all been interesting things, but it is what it is.
Do you approach screenwriting differently than you approach writing, long form fiction?
Yeah, well, I mean, it depends. Like, I mean, with things that people come to me with, yeah, I can be more like a mechanic, where it's like, okay, you've got a Subaru, I'll like, fix that, or you want to, turn this into a DeLorean, I'll try and do that, you know, or you want to build a ADU behind your house, I'll try and figure that out. You know, I mean, it's much more like nuts and bolts, you know, figuring shit out. I mean, of course, you want to be artful and you want to do a good job and you want to be a crafts person, you know, I mean, it's like, you know, like someone building a wardrobe, you know, it's like you want to do a good one, you know, so that's more the attitude that I bring to that stuff. Barring, I'd say, the stuff that I do with Kelly, which is more, it feels more attached to like my own writing. It's like comes from a much similar place, and it's stuff that I'm thinking up, you know, it's not like an assignment. It's more like, what's it going to be? And like, I got to figure out the thing from the ground up. So it's like, that's a different, the ones with Kelly are different. Yeah. And not coincidentally are the ones that get made as opposed to the ones that like other people bring, you know.
So what are you working on right now? Are you working on anything currently?
Yeah, so actually, happily, I just sold a novel that I wrote.
Congrats.
Yeah, I feel super stoked about that. Thank you.
Cheers.
And that was a crazy one because it was largely written like during quarantine. I mean, it was like something that I'd been working on for a few months before, and then quarantine hit, and it like you know, quarantine is very good writing conditions on in a certain way.
I'm almost done with my first novel. Tell me about it. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like, you know, lockdown was helpful, and so that was great. I like cranked it out and it felt relevant to what was going on, and yeah, very happily it has found a home and will come out at some point. But it's like that was pretty cool. So previous to that, I had a batch of short stories that I was going to go out with right when quarantine hit, and
go out. What do you mean go out, like on book tour?
No, go out and try and like get someone.
Got it.
Like,
Sorry.
yeah. So, but yeah, I think wisely, you know, we decided to like not try and sell it at that moment because it's like no one wants a short story collection by like a writer with no sales record, you know, like it's just, there's, you know,
there's a lot of things they don't want right now.
There's a lot of things they don't want, and it was like, this was like a recipe for failure. So it was just like, let's hold off on that. And so, you know, instead it was like, well, I had nothing else to do anyway. I was like, what am I going to do at home? So it's like, I just fucking wrote a novel. And so you know, now there is, you know, God willing, like those short stories will eventually be able to find a place when the world sort of returns, you know. And then, you know, so yeah, so then this first Cow movie came out also, that came out also the week that everything shut down. So it was in theaters for like a week, and then like now is living in another galaxy. But that was good. It was like a good, that was a great run. Like actually the making of that film and all of it was really, really lovely.
Yeah.
And then yeah, so now I'm like trying to like peddle some more like TV stuff, just because, you know, the writing books doesn't pay the rent, you know, so it's like got to find other things to do.
I'm learning. It's a very interesting place, man. Jon, this has been such a blast, man. Thanks for taking the time to talk to us.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Real quick. I always ask a couple of things. Are you on? Do you do social media? Are you on any Instagram? Any? No.
Nah, really.
What's your favorite bookstore?
My favorite bookstore. Well, let me think about that for a sec. I mean, I'm in Portland, so I should say Powell's, you know. And I do love Powell's, but I will say I like the Powell's that's near my house. There's the huge Powell's downtown.
Yeah.
But then there's like the small satellite one on Hawthorne Boulevard, which is near where I live. And that is like just a really lovely little like neighborhood bookstore. It's like got everything you really like would want, you know. So that's pretty great. I'll just go with that. That's easy. Yeah.
Jon, thanks so much for taking the time, man.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
All right. We'll talk to you soon. Take care.
Okay. Take it easy.
Later.
Bye.